Hi, everybody. Welcome to Tiara's Friday live sessions. We are glad for all of you who are joining us live and those of you also listening to the recording. So these are hosted by Tiara International. If you don't know me, I'm Betsy Sobiech with Tiara, which is a leadership development company. And with me today, we have a friend and colleague and collaborator of ours, Andy Swindler. And Andy is here in Chicago, and he is both an expert in conscious capitalism as well as what we call a purpose and leadership coach. So one of the things I'm very excited about today is to dig into the importance of purpose and what purpose is and what role purpose really plays for us as individuals and then even as communities and organizations. So Andy, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So purpose and leadership coach. And then I also know that you have your own firm called Lead From Love. So people can find you at leadfromlove.io. And you were trained through the True Purpose Institute. So we'll probably hear more about that as we talk today as well. Do I have that right?
That is all perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, so purpose. It's so funny because I feel like it's a word that I hear a lot in a couple of different ways, both when people feel like something is missing, whether it feels like they're lacking direction or motivation or something like that. But then also on the flip side, when people have found their purpose, it feels like this awesome driving force. But I know that it seems really mysterious for some people. So maybe we can start, since I know you've studied purpose specifically in a more detailed way than I have, with just a little discussion about what is purpose and how is it either the same or different than some of those other things we might think of, like motivation or inspiration or something like that. So what is purpose? What have you discovered on your journey? How do you define it?
Absolutely. Well, I think they're all related, and the vocabulary, a lot of it overlaps, and a lot of it is confusing because I think people use purpose in all sorts of different ways, and that's not a criticism. That's just the nature of vocabulary. In some ways, it's been around a very long time. If you go back to, Aristotle and talking about virtues and things like that, it sounds a lot like purpose to me. More recently, Viktor Frankl, certainly in Man's Search for Meaning. And then what's really kind of exploding now, especially with my work with conscious capitalism, is the idea of a higher purpose for an organization. And I think that's something that is driving a lot of leaders to also think about that at an individual level. And so that's kind of feeding both ways, probably. Mm-hmm. So one thing I think of purpose as it is certainly very much related to motivation when we think about what motivates us. And to me, the ideal sorts of motivation would be something internal, something related to try not to fling around too many terms that might mean different things to different people. So I'll generally just say from the heart. Just a general distinction I think I'll use for this conversation is the mind or the ego versus the heart. We might say soul, but that starts to get into some more charged territory.
Yeah.
And that idea of that deep, profoundly deep internal motivation, and where is that coming from? And rather than maybe a motivation that is a reaction to society or a reaction to somebody else or a reaction to the role I was conditioned to play. I think this is a lot of what's happening with all of us who are questioning masculinity is on my mind because I've been reading and watching some documentaries about that and Me Too and the patriarchy and diversity and inclusion. I mean, all of this I think is really kind of picking apart like what are all these roles we've actually so far in society created a pretty limited number of boxes to put us in, and that's a function of the ego. That's like, oh, well, we want to organize things, we want to categorize things so that we can make sense of it, so we can control it. But I think this pursuit of purpose at the soul level is how can we expand beyond those simpler categorizations? And I'd like to believe every single person or soul on this planet has a unique expression of why they're here and what they're going to do in this world. And so part of it is that deep, profound internal sorts of motivation, and then part of it is, to me, a trajectory or a directional tool. And so one of the ways I describe purpose is it's the relationship between what you're motivated to do in this exact moment and the relationship between that and that ultimate trajectory, right? Mm-hmm. And so especially in the organizational purpose context, that's probably the most common vision of it, which is this North Star, or this like, what is our aspiration? Where are we headed? Where are we pointed? Particularly in business, as something greater than money and making money in conscious capitalism. And so to me, it's the relationship between those. Like, how do I stay grounded and know why I'm doing what I'm doing in the moment? And at the same time, always being reminded of like, what is my direction? Where am I headed? And to the combination of those things to me is very, very, very powerful, because that, I mean, a lot of this, in addition to motivation, I think it boils down to frankly, how do we spend our limited time and energy? Mm-hmm. And really, as human beings, that is a quantifiable limitation each of us has in this lifetime. And so purpose, if you're anything like me, which I think you are in some ways, in terms of just being interested in a lot of things and wanting to do lots of things and having lots of creative skills and ambitions and all of these sorts of things. And there just simply isn't enough life to go around in the context of time and energy to do all of that. So how do we make those choices about how to spend our time and energy? I think purpose is a very valuable way to do that.
Yeah, and that really does align with a lot that we do with our TR model for true leadership. We call it an inside out leadership model. And the word we use often is inspiration, that we help people identify and really call forth that inner sense of what inspires them, what moves them, which seems to be present no matter what across all areas. And once they can articulate that, that also does give them sometimes some direction or some idea about, like, yes, do more of this or less of this, and have that be aligned with that sense of inspiration or purpose, as opposed to what someone thinks they should do or what's prescribed or an opinion. But it does have both that internal sense of like, what comes from within, what's my sense of purpose or inspiration, and then what does that lead me to do. And I think we're also very much aligned in that it goes across roles. Like when you said it can cross roles, it's not like you have a purpose for each segmented part of your life, but there could be more of a core purpose that then you can apply to lots of areas or varied interests, for sure. So my question is, when you think about that, like, it has both that internal component, and then it also does have that practical, external, directional thing associated with it. Where do you think purpose comes from? Like, how much of it is something we just get to kind of make up because it's like, okay, this is my purpose, I'm choosing it? And how much of it is something you think that, I don't know, like what words people would use, but it feels more like intrinsic or innate, or you were born with it, or destined or fated, like depending on what you believe. In the work that you do with purpose coaching and the method you follow, what's that balance of like personal choice and just creating your purpose out of kind of thin air, and then following something that feels like it's like meant to be?
Absolutely. So, well, briefly on inspiration, I think inspiration is important. I think passion is important. So there's an ongoing discussion, like, what is the relationship with all these things? I just had an interesting discussion yesterday about passion, and so far I've landed that, passion feels like the fuel, whereas purpose feels more like the trajectory. And I might, based on what you just said, I might think of inspiration a little similarly, because that is more of like the source and the fuel and the excitement and all of that. And I think purpose, in a way, especially that more trajectory version of purpose, and having clear purpose statements, they're related in terms of it setting a direction, but it also could help fill in the gap, right? If we're not feeling, is inspiration a kind of a 24/7, 100% thing? Not in my experience. Like, I feel really inspired one day, and then I feel like the next day, who knows? And same with passion. And I'm kind of reevaluating various passions in my life, like music. And so I think purpose maybe that's part of it, is in the moments when we're not just completely all in, inspired, just on fire, what keeps us going, what connects us and keeps us on that path, with the faith and the trust that we will have those explosions of passion and inspiration again. I don't know.
I like
Does
that.
Line up with you?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. One thing, so with your question, so I'd say let's say there's at least two big categories. In the work with true purpose, the basic fundamental belief system is that everybody does have a soul level purpose. There's a reason everybody, this is going to get into some different belief systems, but one I basically subscribe to is the idea that that there is a soul in a human body that chose to be here. And the idea is that in that choice lies the purpose. There's some reason that our soul chose to be here at this moment. So that it's a very specific kind of belief system that we not only, there is a true purpose to our lives, so some people don't believe that, and that's fine, but that it is already existing in a way, like you said, it's implicit or it's intrinsic, and it's to be discovered. So really, true purpose is very much a process of discovery and unveiling that purpose that's there, and actually constantly deepening our understanding of it as we go through life using these tools and techniques. Now, you know, it's part of actually our intake process. You know, I'll ask, do you believe that? Do you believe that there's a purpose to be discovered? Because if so, then this is a really good process for you. If you don't believe there's a purpose at all, then that's probably not a great purpose. Or somewhere in the middle, which I think is what you expressed, is does somebody believe that they have a purpose, but they can kind of just make it up? Any
right.
purpose will do.
Like in that middle, sometimes people wish that there were purpose, but they're skeptical that it's really the case. Like I feel like either there's the thing of like, yeah, I believe in purpose, but I think it's all my creation. But when you were talking, I was just had this, you know, I just remember a lot of clients that come to us where it's like, I hope or I wish that there's purpose, but they're not really sure if it's something that they can really uncover because they feel like they've tried for so long or searched for so long, or it feels so hard to, or elusive for them to nail down.
And yeah, and in that middle ground, you know, some people, you know, I've met people who kind of just wake up in the morning and it's like, well, here's my purpose today.
Yeah.
And that's that, and that's fine. I think you just said something really important though, which is this idea, and this can happen whether intentionally or not. I think even amongst those of us in like the purpose community, that you know we get really excited about it, and we probably build it up into a thing, and then that through all sorts of other interactions and projections or whatever, somebody thinks, oh my goodness, you know, I have to, wow, I'm supposed to have this change agent worldwide, solving world hunger level purpose or whatever, and some people do, and I'm always very excited to work with those people, and especially if that can be actuated through a business. The vast majority of people, that's probably not true. That you know, I don't know. For instance, I always think simply raising a family and raising children, I think is an incredibly important and noble purpose. It's not one I've pursued myself personally, and I appreciate that.
Yes, so any of you who are just joining us right now, tuning in live, thank you. This is Tiara International, our Friday Facebook Live, and today we're talking with Andy Swindler, who is a purpose and leadership coach. So as you know, if you have been following us, we will log in and look at comments and reply to your thoughts afterward. And so anything goes. Like, part of these Friday dialogues is to really talk about things and dig in a way that we can explore and learn from each other. And one of the things about our leadership model that totally relates to what you're just saying, or just our approach at all with our work, is that there's a lot of fluidity in terms of how people come to their sense of purpose or motivation or inspiration or whatever it is. And we also aren't super attached to like which doorway people go through to find that sense of purpose. So for example, if someone is listening to this and they're like, wow, soul chose to be here, soul has a purpose, there's a method in which I could reclaim that or remember that, or I think you said the word unveil that, awesome, then that's definitely a path to follow the instinct and explore. And at the same time, if some of you feel like that's not really your thing or how you found your purpose or even a different definition, we'd love to hear it, because we think it's just in the comparison and the dialogue where there is this discovery for each person about how they really make sense of their own life, their own work, their vocation, their career, and love comparing all of it for sure. I know for myself, I think it is this combination of feeling like there are things that you can't explain that you're drawn to or that you're good at, whether it's skills or talents or gifts that you've always been able to do. And this is something we work with our clients on all the time. Like, how do you really be honest without a sense of ego or bragging about like just what's unique and special about you? And also like what you're attracted to doing or not doing. And then how do you follow that down a path that will lead you to have a life that does feel like it unfolds with a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning, and things like that for sure. How do you differentiate with people you work with between like the talents and gifts and things they're good at and what really is more of a defined purpose? Oh, and then the other question, you know, in any order or whatever, take it in any direction, is like, is there just one? Like, I sometimes feel like that's also the puzzle for people because they feel like, okay, if I just knew the one thing that I would be able to do, everything would sort itself out and I would have this sense of direction and I would be motivated every day, kind of like you said. So I think it's like one thing either they're supposed to do or they're supposed to figure out, and like everything hangs on identifying that. So in the work that you do you feel like it's one thing? Does it change over time? Are there several things? And how does that relate to just stuff that you like to do or that you're good at?
Yeah, there's a lot there. I think the that expectation comes from the ego, right? Like oh, if I just do this one thing. I mean, that's how the ego tends to operate, where it's like, oh, if I compare myself to others, you know, oh, if I just had what they had, or if I just could move this one thing along. One of the interesting things, and I'll talk a little more if you want in a minute about the methodology itself, but one of the key concepts is what we call connecting to a trusted source of wisdom. And that's actually one of the major differentiating things about this work. We call it a direct method of directly connecting. You could also use the word intuition, but the trusted source term is rather beautiful because it's inclusive of all belief systems. Like I'm not going to dictate what anybody believes, so long as they believe that there's some entity, anything really goes, some entity that knows their purpose, that can communicate with them, and that it will tell them their purpose or clues about their purpose. Mm-hmm. So that connection is the key that in some ways separates this from a process of the ego trying to think about purpose or triangulate purpose or something like that. We call that an indirect method. And that's actually how most purpose work is done. And it's also at the organizational level. And like, if you ever read a mission statement that was really generic, well, it's because a bunch of people were sitting around a room thinking about what the purpose should be, which results in a non-emotionally charged purpose statement. So what we get when we work with a trusted source is something that we literally use this as a test in the process. When you say it out loud, does it make your whole body resonate? Does it vibrate? Does it create an emotional reaction? Does it give you goosebumps? Does it make you cry? I mean, those are really good signs that you've actually gotten to some deeper purpose. So one thing, there were a few questions there, but so one aspect of it is that in true purpose, the ideology is that there is this one true purpose, but the minute we translate it to English or any language, it's come out of the soul realm. It's come out of the divine or the ethereal realm. Right. So our understanding of it is immediately, in some ways, limited. Yeah. And so what that means is that we're constantly, learning more about it. So yes, we do come up with a purpose statement, and according to Tim Kelly, who created this process, the average half-life of a purpose statement is about 1 year. So the recommendation is at least once a year to actually go through some part of the process again and dig into it more. A key aspect is this partnership with ego and saying, okay, well, right here, right now, whatever you believe, we're in a human body, moving around this physical world. So we need to remain safe. We need to have love and belonging and esteem. And if you go up Maslow's hierarchy, all of this purpose stuff is right at the very top of the self-actualization. And that partnership with ego also means we spend the there's 5 stages of the process. The first two stages are entirely based on building a partnership with the ego. To gain permission, literally ask the ego for permission to go to this level of depth of the soul, because it can be perceived as a threat to the ego to actually do this work, because it's big and scary. Yeah.
So interesting, because we also, in our process, and I haven't really ever thought about it exactly that way, but we do some work where we identify, we call it the 3 queens, so that you're having a dialogue with 3 different parts of yourself that have different roles, whether it's the role to protect or defend yourself when you feel threatened, whether it's the role to think and to strategize and try to get ahead, or whether it's the true queen role, which I think is in the realm of what you're talking about around where, you know, true purpose also would live. And I love what you're saying as a reminder, is that like the purpose itself lives in a realm that's sort of inarticulated, and probably there is like a thematic realm of someone's purpose for their life. And then when you put it in language, it does all of a sudden get like defined. And so part of, I know for my own self in my journey of like, what's my purpose, or how do I articulate that? I always have to just like sometimes set aside the wordsmithing to be like, well, how does it feel? And does it feel in the realm of what's moving you forward? Like, do you get it? It's not like, do you have to actually state it out loud? Perfect. Because I can go down definitely a rabbit hole of just like tweaking my purpose statement for a long time, trying to get it perfect. And then I realized that I'm out of like that heart space of connecting to really the realm of my purpose and just doing like a science project in some way.
It's a really good sign that the ego has taken over the process. And it's like, oh, I'm just going to kind of tweak these words and make them sound right and all of that. And it's not to actually say that that could never work. We have a constant feedback loop with this idea of trusted source, or heart, as you said, where, okay, well, maybe the ego did have an idea. Well, let's run that by the trusted source.
Right. And I also like that you said that it's a relationship with ego. Like you said, there's the 5 steps, and the first 2 are relationship with ego. And I think that's really important that you include ego in the mix, because I think right now there's a lot of different things out there in different areas where people are trying to like suppress or get rid of, or I don't know, something with the ego, but like including it in the journey of this lifetime, I think is really important. And you're much more likely to move forward towards something in partnership with your ego than if you're distracted, like always trying to manage it, shut it down, embarrassed by it, whatever it might be. So that is really interesting that you said that. And then you said 5 things, and the first 2 are with the ego. So what else do you do then in your method?
Yeah, so the stage 1 is what we call ego engagement. And that's actually, we actually do use an indirect method to define purpose through the ego as an introduction to the whole process, and as a way also to look at through a different lens at the end of the process. And then the second one is ego permission. And there's a really beautiful process to learn. We end up looking at fears and needs kind of in a Maslow's hierarchy kind of way. And then fears, like what is holding somebody back from this process? And that permission process is fascinating, because it can actually create a framework that goes beyond this purpose work, that for somebody to really understand their fears and you know what might be holding them back in other areas of life. We generate what we call a list of conditions. These are things that must be true in order to continue doing this work.
Yeah.
And with that, we move into the trusted source connection and inquiry, which is, so a trusted source, one example of a universal trusted source would be a trusted source that knows everybody's purpose. It could be like God or the universe or something like that. A personal trusted source would be something unique to a person and yet outside of them, like a spirit animal, guardian angel, deceased relative, something like that. And then an internal trusted source could be like soul or higher self, spirit, something like that. So whatever that is, any belief system will do. That's that whole process of, you know, so my job as a coach is really to help somebody connect to that trusted source.
Okay.
And the stages 3 and 4 actually tend to go back and forth a little bit, because the 4th one is then interpreting that. What does that mean? And actually, this also reinforces the partnership with ego, because we want to bring it back into the realm of ego, because ego is the part of us that moves through this world and makes things happen, right? So there's this idea of, there's various techniques, and I won't go into all of that. There's various ways, techniques to talk to trusted source, gather this information. And then there's a process of interpreting it, sorting it, and creating purpose statements. And eventually, there's a lot of winnowing down, and eventually getting these, there's also four different categories, and I won't necessarily go into that today, but we use four different categories because there's different statements for different moments of life and different areas where you might be asking a question about what to do or where you're headed. And so then you get all of that, you get your purpose statements, and the fifth stage is manifestation. We build a strategic purpose plan for your life to bring it in and embody it and to bring it everywhere you can. And that's an ongoing practice. I mean, practice is a key thing. You asked that question earlier about like, well, if I just had that one thing, and if I just had, well, yeah, part of it's about having those words, right? And that relationship with trusted source can absolutely be an ongoing thing that's really useful, actually asking about things way beyond purpose. But there's this idea of practice, right? Just what are the daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly practices that will actually reinforce this, bring this into life?
Is there an example of both a purpose statement that you could share with us as well as practices, like what that means on the other side of this process?
Well, I could tell you my 4 purpose statements if we have time for that.
Yeah, let's do it.
So, and I guess now I am going into the 4 categories a little bit. So essence is simply the state of being. So my essence is that I am gratitude in the eye of the storm.
Okay.
And my blessing is like the daily interpretation or manifestation of purpose. And something I haven't really touched on very much here that I really believe in, if you're functioning from this soul level purpose, they tend to be naturally altruistic. I've never met anybody, and this is important actually, because there's lots of people who had purposes in the world that did lots of really awful things like genocide and all sorts of other things.
Yeah.
And so then we can get into that whole discussion or not, but this idea, if we're connected at the soul level with oneness, unity, however you want to define that, that is implicitly altruistic, because we are creatures of love. And so blessing is the idea of how do we bestow a transformational gift on the people around us? And how do we define that? So how do we bless other people? How do we give people our blessing? So I take the hands of leaders the moment they open their eyes and hearts to show them how love can be applied to every relationship in their lives. That's my blessing. Mission is arguably the most traditionally expressed version of purpose that aligns with that North Star idea of the trajectory, that aspiration, that long-term goal. The definition in true purpose is that it can only be done once. Even if it's something absolutely massive and impossible, like solving world hunger, that still can only be done once. So my mission is to still the world so it may hear its own heartbeat. And that's actually what, on my website, what I say is my purpose, but you have a lot more detail in this discussion. And then message is the wisdom that each person has to bestow on the rest of the world. Each person at a soul level has a divine amount of wisdom to share and to better the world through that wisdom. And so my message is that everyone and everything is perfect in this moment.
Awesome. So the 4 dimensions are essence, blessing, mission, and message. And those are the examples of what you've articulated right now in those 4 areas, which is awesome. And as I'm listening to you, you always have like lots of reactions going on. And sometimes I also listen from our clients and things like that. And I definitely know there are times for sure in my life where I would have been like, okay, wait a minute. I heard you say that it's going to be emotional if I articulate my purpose. I have to face my fears, one after another, that it's like all this different stuff. And there's definitely a part of me that's always like, I don't know if I want to do that. Is there a Cliff's Notes or a shorter way, or like a book and an online survey I can take instead? And I feel like in this body of work of purpose, and some of you who are watching may know, like here is actually a book or an audio recording or a series that got you closer and closer in a different way to articulating your purpose. And I also have always been fascinated by what it is that you say you do, because it is for people who are really looking for what is a pretty deep and methodical, yet also really sort of compassionate way of looking at what your purpose is and how that purpose is supposed to live in the world, which is awesome for sure. So I appreciate that quite a bit. How long does it usually take? So I know we are getting close to the end of the time we'll spend together, but what if someone were wanting to do that kind of purpose coaching, what does it entail?
So I typically say around 12 sessions. You know, each journey is unique. So it's hard to say exactly, but I'd say around 12 sessions is how I operate. You know, one of the cool things that is emerging is there's a group called the Global Purpose Leaders that has been emerging for about a couple of years now. And one of the things I love about that is, you know, yes, I'm certified in True Purpose and I'm very involved in that community and that process, very committed to it. But in this Global Purpose Leaders community, oh my goodness, there are just so many different expressions of leading people to help them find their purpose, even how is purpose defined? You know, is it a calling? Is it, as some of my colleagues would say, I'll paraphrase, you know, it's where, you know, your greatest hunger meets the heartbreak of the world, right? Mm-hmm. And so again, that gets back to this idea that it's implicitly good for the world, like we're implicitly building a better world by living our purpose. Mm-hmm. So yeah, was that the question?
It's definitely in the realm. So about 12 weeks. And I also know that you said that companies can also, instead of doing maybe a typical mission type of work, articulation work, they can work with a purpose coach in a process where they're also collectively articulating their purpose, whether it's for a community, a neighborhood, a project, or an organization. So I think that's pretty interesting too. I know that for our business, for Tiara International, it's been around now for about a decade. And we often have talked about, like, what would Tiara want? What is the purpose of the organization, sort of like independent from the six of us who have really sourced it for those years. So I think that's an important way to look at community too, as well. And I love that, and I didn't know this until this conversation about the 4 dimensions, because as I was thinking with the conversation, I was like, well, I feel like I have, you know, all the work that I've done over my whole life and with Tiara, you know, articulating my inspiration, articulating my leadership mantra, working with our programs and our models, I feel like I have 3 themes that kind of come up. So now that I heard the 4 dimensions, like I can start to put them in, because I know I have a theme around like standing at the crossroads and shining the light so people have the information they need to choose, like when they're at like a transition point. I also know I have a theme around like putting pieces together, something around the creative energy there. And then another one that has to do with just like fully embracing the whole experience of being alive. That often comes across in our 3 queens work as the queen of aliveness or something like that. So it's interesting to see the overlapping in this work too. So again, for those of you who are watching, Tiara International here, I'm Betsy, this is Andy. He's with Purpose and Leadership Coaching. His business is Lead from Love. I know from the Tiara side, if you like what we do on Fridays, you can like us on Facebook or subscribe on YouTube, because we always choose these the next week. In the notes from this, we will have Andy's website so that you can get a hold of him directly. And I would say, if you're listening to this and you think, there's something about that feels really right, like just reach out. He's very easy to get a hold of and to talk about this stuff, because I know it really is your passion for sure. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, and you hit on something really I do want to mention too. One of the reasons I gravitated to True Purpose is that it's one of the very few purpose processes, especially at this like soul level, that scales to organizations. So it works for individuals, scales to organizations. I think that's really important. But there are so many things, you know, it's so funny. And I'm always wanting to look through different lenses. Just yesterday, I had a coach I've met recently, and she did the passion test with me, which was Janet Atwood, which is, you know, I'd never even heard of it. And I even though I go deep and I use this very specific, probably elaborate sounding process as I've described it, There's so many lenses. If I were to offer any piece of advice for anybody curious about this, it's just find some space and quiet. And like you just said, like just if you could even identify 3 themes. I mean, there's so many methods and tools and techniques to get to that kind of idea, and just notice, where is that showing up in my life?
Yeah. Yes, and if you're watching this sometime close to like this actual date of the recording, from a Tiara perspective, we have 2 things happening in September that relate to this. We have our 15 days to wow, which is when we do 15 days in a row. We share a wow factor every day that you could do in 15 minutes or less, and the whole thing's only $15. We try to make it really accessible. And our theme this time is change your mind, change your life. So when we talk about belief systems or how we make up or get in our own way with our thinking, we're going to really dig into that so that our thoughts, actions, and behaviors all line up with whatever we instinctively know we want next, whether it's a goal perspective or a purpose perspective. So that's cool. You can find that on our website. And then we're also doing, and we don't do this very often, an actual 3 Queens workshop. So the end of September in the evening, we're doing a 90-minute workshop where if you are interested in how would you articulate your true inspiration using that methodology, and then also build that partnership with some of those other sides of yourself that you may or may not always be willing to see, that would be a great one. So our website is tiara-leadership.com, and you can find all that stuff on the purchase page. And if you're listening at a later time, there'll be other things for you to see there. So Andy, anything do you want to say in closing? I think we're probably at the end of, I know you and I could talk for maybe 4 or 5 more hours about purpose and the point of being alive, but is there anything you want to say in closing this dialogue?
Well, I just want to express gratitude. This is, yeah, I could talk about this stuff all day, and I'm thrilled for the opportunity, and hopefully that's useful for people just to get some gears turning, some ideas going. You know, what you just said, though, about your offerings is so critical. I mean, there's so many beautiful expressions of, that I might call resilience training as a very broad term, right? Like self-awareness, conscious leadership. I mean, all of this is just, what is really going on with us? Like, what can we own? What are we projecting? You know, what is coming from our wounds and our things that actually we could translate into gifts? And that all of that work is I think critically important if anybody ever wants to really go to this deeper level of purpose, because the ego has the power to really cast a shadow on all of that deeper level. And so the more work we do, the more we embrace our fears and resistance, the more we'll learn about ourselves.
I know, and it's always on the other side worth it. And I think a lot of times, once you're through it, easier than it might sound if you feel like you haven't really looked at that stuff in a while. And there's lots of ways to be supported. So whether it's purpose coaching, whether it's some of our leadership programs, whether it's something else that you find, there are ways you can be supported. Because I think we would agree that we feel like everyone is really in somewhat the driver's seat or a leader in their life and their work, and having that driven by what you understand to be a deep sense of either inspiration or purpose does start to help things make sense. So reach out to us, reach out to Andy, share with us in the comments anything that you have done that feels like it's relevant and a tool or a practice that someone could use. And we will see you on an upcoming Friday. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.